Hi there. Good afternoon, good evening. My name's Nick Hackworth. I'm a writer and curator, and here with Sassan, who you all know. So Sassan, thank you very much for inviting me to work with you on this exhibition, do some writing, and also do this talk. So we thought we'd take advantage of you all being here, the artworks being here, and us being in this incredible location to have a short talk. So I'm going to share some thoughts that I've had and have about Sassan's work. We're going to have a discussion, we're going to have a chat, and then we're going to hopefully have some questions from you. So any questions you've been dying to ask Sassan over the years, now is your chance. So I first met Sassan about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and we've been working fairly closely since then. Working together on essays, we're working on a book together on Sassan's series of paintings called Flowers of the Soul. And the first time I met Sassan was in his studio, where I'm sure many of you have been in not far from here. And there were two things that impressed me when I went to the studio. The first, of course, was the work, which I loved. I loved the way it looked. I loved how it made me feel. And there was something else about our interaction, or our conversation that day, that I thought was very interesting and surprising for me, which was that Sassan talked very openly and passionately about the art world, about his artworks, his paintings being connected to energy and to an idea of spirituality. And for people in the art world, I mean, obviously we have an audience of people with varying engagements with the art world, but if you work in the art world as a professional, it's actually quite unusual, surprisingly enough, to find contemporary artists talking about spirituality in art, or at least until recently, it was pretty unusual. I started in the art world as an art critic for the Evening Standard. And I hadn't worked in the art world before. I kind of dove straight into it. I went into that job without really much experience about the art world, and I found that I made some accidentally made some artists rather upset by describing their artwork as beautiful. And I discovered quite quickly that there are some no-nos about the way that art is described within the art world, because the art world has its own culture, and its own discourse, which actually is quite political and it's quite materialistic. And certain things you're not really allowed to talk about, or you're traditionally not being allowed to talk about. And one of them is beauty, because strangely enough, artists are very happy for their work to be attractive in certain ways, but they don't want it to be seen as beautiful in a way that is immediately accessible. And a second one is making art that speaks very clearly or very openly and passionately about the spirit. And in fact, Rosalind Krauss, who's a very famous and influential critic and philosopher, said that it's embarrassing to talk about art and spirit in the same sentence. And if you think about any visits that you've made to, say, the Tate or MoMA, going around looking at all the galleries of all the classics, from the birth of modernism through to abstract expressionism, you'll know as well as I do that when you read those wall texts that are down by the painting and the explanations of the school, like abstract expressionism in New York in the 1950s, it's really dry, it's really formal descriptions. It kind of gives you the impression that all of these artists over decades and decades and decades, they've only really been interested in this kind of very dry, formal evolution of forms. Like abstract expressionism was about the way you could manipulate paint to create abstract forms in a very formless way. And then you get minimalism, which is a almost diametrically opposed reaction to that. But the discourse that is really dictated by academics and curators has always been this very materialist interpretation of the history of art. And that is, of course, because we live in a materialist culture. Since the late 19th century, science, capitalism, the way that we've structured and think about our world is really materialistic. and people tend to think about, you know, spirit, religion, other things, they're kind of somewhere else. So talking to Sassan and reading, for example, the essay that you wrote, The Age of Energy, which Sassan wrote and is online, and reading about some of your experiences, for example, there's a very good article in The Guardian, interview with you, where you talk about some of your personal experiences in Iran and how your own personal journey, spiritual journey, has interacted and also informed your artwork. It was really interesting, and it was not challenging for me, but it was something quite new. And so I thought about that, and I thought about how Sassan talked about that in relation to his paintings, and then looking at his paintings, I was trying to work out what I felt about what he was saying about them. And I felt very quickly that there's an integrity to Sassan's position, the way that he engages with those aspects of life that is really manifest in the paintings. There's a real coherence, and he brings those two worlds together. And I think for me that makes all of these paintings that you can see around us not only visual objects, but for me I've really seen them as kind of manifestations of energy, kind of like energy fields. And I found that a really interesting way to think about his work. And then thinking about this whole interpretational way of understanding the work, I started researching into this subject of spirituality and art, partly for the essays that I've been writing for you and in relation to your work. And what's very interesting is I think that Sassan's work is very timely in two ways. The first is that history, of course, is not a static thing. History as it's written is always subjective. People are always changing it, and of course art history is like every other history. It keeps shifting depending on who is writing, on what ideologies are dominant at any one day, and how we are reinterpreting the world from the point of view of now. In art history right now, there is a lot of revisionism going on because of Black Lives Matter and all the different movements that are fighting to ensure that underrepresented voices throughout history are now being recognised. So all across the world, academics, museums are no longer just telling the story of dead white men, which is what it's been really for decades in terms of telling the story of modernism. And of course bringing many other histories that were always there, but just largely ignored. One other history that's largely been ignored is really fascinating, and actually that's the history of the relationship between spirituality, and I use that word in a really broad sense. It's not, that can mean many different things, but it certainly means an engagement with something that is beyond the rational. And there's been a slow movement to start recognising the role that has played in the history of modernism and the role that that's played in the way that artists have made their work. And one of the first important moments in this history was in, I think, 1986. There was an amazing exhibition that was curated at LACMA in LA, and it was called Spiritual in Art, and it was about spirituality in abstract painting. And that curator wrote that the vast majority of people misunderstand abstract art because of the way that it's described and written about. And they basically looked at everyone, classics from Malevich, Paul Klee, through to abstract expressionists and minimalism, and actually looked at what those artists were actually thinking about and writing about, and what was actually inspiring and informing their work. And actually, as you start excavating and actually researching, you realise that actually the intentionality of many of these artists has really been underrepresented throughout the history of art, as it's been told recently. And I think because there's a real shift, there's a real mind shift going on in our culture, you're starting to see that approach to materialism and that kind of dominance really weakening and actually broadening up into a much more open-minded and liberal understanding of what informs art. For example, the Guggenheim in 2019, they had their most popular ever show with 600,000 visitors. It was an exhibition of Hilda af Klint, who was an amazing Swedish abstract painter who was a medium and a spiritualist. And actually she really made her artworks not necessarily as artworks but as kind of pictures of something beyond our dimension. And I think that's really now touching a nerve as our world changes, given all the challenges and the crises that are unfortunately part of our contemporary experience. I think people are looking for artwork that can do more than just be an object, be more than just a commodity, be somewhere where you can really connect perhaps with yourself and also a broader sense of connection and energy out there. So that's really one of the most interesting intellectual journeys I've taken in relation to looking at your art. So that seems a good place to start talking to you and asking you questions about your art. So how does it feel for you when you're making your art? Can you describe why you do it?
Well, I think to answer this question I really need to start by addressing the moment where I realized that I really need to bring on the canvas something that means a lot to me, and I think that it deserves a lot of value and understanding. The beginning of it all was purely a coincidence of a series of, let's say, unfortunate events that happened one after each other, which led to my understanding of something greater at play. As everybody knows, I work a lot with trying to visualize and bring on the canvas the feeling and the sensations that we constantly feel during our days, during this life that we have been given here. The importance of understanding these sensations for me is one word: it's energy. And I really think that we as human beings, we have to be able to understand the importance of this dormant power that exists inside of all of us. We are made of it, so if we do connect to it, we're able to have an evolution that I believe is mandatory for us today, especially in this crazy world that we live in. And as human beings, we are capable of doing so much more than we have been. And I believe as a creative, as an artist, that putting this message out there will one day create some sort of a window for everyone, for the audience to understand that we can truly access this dormant power that exists everywhere, that exists between myself and you and all of us that are sitting here. We're constantly exchanging so much energy, we're not even seeing it, but it's constantly happening. So this was the beginning of it all. And after a few years being inside of this process and constantly getting lost in this world of understanding how and what would be the best way to portray this, I found myself in this path of creating these paintings that you can see here all around you, and most of you have been seeing during the past, I would say 5 to 8 years. So, yes, everyone knows that I do paint energy, but I think there's a much more important message here, and that message is that we should never forget what we are made of and what we are capable of as human beings. And once we do not forget this valuable lesson, we'll always be able to remain on a path which will lead us to this necessary evolution that we all need.
What do you see as the role of art within all of that in general? So obviously for you, that's one of your points of engagement, presumably, then you're obviously only one, because you obviously was personal practice, it also does that. How do you see that working with people who say who collect your work or just appreciate your work?
Well, I have a lot of collectors who truly are passionate about the work itself, which for me is really important because, I mean, even here I was talking to some people that I did not know before, and we right away we understand that we speak the same language. Liking the work is something that comes with this understanding. So if as a collector you like the work and you understand the message, it's a very good thing. But for me, it's a little bit more than that. When someone truly sees through the work and understands the process and sees what I have gone through to be able to bring this out, tied in with the message behind it, this is really unique and important to me. So, for example, I was speaking to Andrew right here, and we were just, talking about, life and understanding of all these, issues that are being thrown at us in life, and right away we had a connection, which this is what is important to me, and obviously the second there is this connection on a particular subject that I care for a lot, and I mean, at the end of the day we need to understand I've been putting at least a good decade of my life pushing this message forth with my work, so of course it's very important to me, and I do believe that art as a medium can truly transfer very important lessons for all of us who are looking for the right messages in life. So
I think it's interesting the power that, think about the power of art in terms of moving people. And I think there might be many, but two broadly. One is, of course, in the work itself, like visually what it can manifest. Because, of course, we can imbue objects and works with meanings that we choose to, or that we collectively choose to. And obviously, one of the great things about artworks is they can mean many different things at once. But when I was thinking about your work being timely, and also art in a time of crisis, and of course, sitting in this incredible place, it's almost unimaginable there's a crisis elsewhere, but these are unstable times, and I think it is important to think about how that relates to what art is and what it can be. And for me, one way it can relate is to ask, what kind of meanings do I want, or do we need as a culture from our culture, from our artworks? And I think inviting people to have more expansive relationships where it can actually be something quite profound is a starting point. Because as an artist, if you start that conversation with a viewer or someone who's appreciating the art, it's almost like letting them know that you can have that kind of relationship with the artwork seems like a starting point.
Well, totally. As we were talking before, I mean, we're sitting here in a beautiful place, and we decided to have a very interesting group of people to be here who share similar interests in the work and what I'm trying to do with my work, as well as what you're trying to do with your work. So it's all about this exchange of experience, because once we are here and we talk about these subjects, there are doors that keep opening, without us realizing it, and it's like opening little windows of opportunity inside of our being and inside of our minds and souls that will lead us to new beginnings, positive beginnings in the future. So I totally agree with the fact that really having these unique experiences. I'm all about having weird shows and exhibitions. I'm a kind of an artist who doesn't like to follow the trend, and it's not a move that came to me just like that. It's just how I feel about it. So this is not the first exhibition that I'm doing in such a setting, but it's definitely a setting that is very important to me. We've had a few exhibitions in the past few years where we had shared similar interests in a similar setting. So I definitely am for having these unique exchanges in such a close circle, because this has value. This is what is important to me, to be able to transfer the message that goes behind my work.
I mean, that's the other amazing thing about the art world, is that it brings people together in a way that most other kind of cultural forms don't, which is amazing, and it's a real privilege to be part of the art world, I think, for that reason, amongst others. I mean, obviously, while we're talking about being here in a beautiful setting, I mean, I'm sure everyone intuitively appreciates it, but it's extraordinary seeing the works and seeing paintings in a natural setting, because obviously you really don't get to see that very often. And it's really fascinating to see a medium that you always, obviously, for very practical reasons, normally see indoors, just to be interacting with light as it changes. The freestanding wall over there that has the painting that's framed right by the forest is absolutely extraordinary to be able to see painting right there. So talking about energy and manifesting that in this abstract form, and then being surrounded by all these natural forms around us, it's a really extraordinary aesthetic experience. Should we open up some questions to the usual? So, do we have any questions from the audience? Any questions?
Started introducing images and flowers.
Why, actually, funny enough, this is a body of works that I have been working on for the past 2 years. It knows very well. What happened with these flowers that suddenly started popping out on these canvases is purely a symbol of strength, hope, and life. For me, these are linked to, again, some unfortunate events that happened in my life in the past, where I find myself in a situation where I felt extremely trapped, and I always imagined myself running in my mother's home in the north of Tehran in Lalon, which means tulips, and I always had this link, this positive experience, finding myself running in these fields of flowers over there every summer, and we used to hang out there all the time when I was a kid. And when I found myself in these situations, I automatically and naturally found myself visualizing the same sceneries, and it brought me a lot of hope, power, strength, and life, and it stuck with me. And this is why suddenly, naturally, these flowers started popping out in my canvases, and it started more in an abstract form, as Nick knows, and it started developing into something that we see today, more refined, more clear, and I think that it was a very natural process that came from within. It wasn't anything planned.
Next question. Okay.
What about
Only compliments.
what about the sculpture?
Sculptures.
Sculpture is quite new.
Yeah, so the sculptures that you see at the beginning of the garden are a continuation of a very special piece that I have worked very closely with the municipality and the city of Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, which is Monsieur le Maire, who is right there, sorry. And we worked very closely together to develop one piece that is installed in the cap in Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat entitled Rebirth, which is part of our exhibition. We did in September, and the sculpture purely focuses on our rebirth as human beings.
Are they completely disconnected from the paintings? Or just like
No, there's a connection. There's a connection, and it comes from a series called Rituals, where I started bringing these figures on top of the canvas from about 4 or 5 years ago. So we had dancers, we had people in love, we had people praying, and I really felt that bringing these figures out of the canvas, transforming them into the 3D form, was something very special for me. And thanks to help and support of the Maire of Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, Monsieur le Maire, Julien, everybody, the whole team, the whole family, the whole city, who is my extended family, who managed to install this first large piece in front of the Grand Hotel, and just standing there. And these, what you see now, these bronze sculpture, are continuation of that in a smaller form. And bringing 2-meter solid bronze sculptures here would have been very difficult task. We managed to be able to focus on these sculptures.
Thank you. Any last question?
Some of these paintings, compared with last year's, they look as if you've been exploring new ways of kind of like applying and removing paint. If I'm correct. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so you remember, you remember the works from the past exhibitions where we used to discuss and focus a lot on the layering of my work. So my work involves a lot of layering and delayering in reality, and I can work on a canvas or be with a canvas for 4 to 6 months, depending on the size. But what is very important for me in this process is that all the right elements, all the right feelings and sensations are present on the canvas. So if you look at this piece behind us right here, this is an example of a canvas that took a long time based on the fact that I brought in a new medium. So there's a natural process between some pigments that I've started to use and some other natural elements that brings a new texture. And I think this is where you see the difference between my traditional style of work and this new evolution. So I think texture would be the most different thing.
I think that's one last question.
I'm sorry. First.
I really appreciated what you said about abstract expressionist art, because that's what I felt was really expressed. But when you talk about the spiritual place in your heart, where you come from, does this have anything to do with religion back then compared with art? During the Middle Age, the painting would always reflect on the religion, if that makes sense.
Well,
is this like this for your art with your spirituality, or are you affiliated to a special religion?
well, for me, my work is directly linked to the experience of life.
Yeah.
And in this world, just similar to everyone else that we're here. So I am not someone who is affiliated with a religion or any other religion. Having said that, obviously I have read a lot of the books and a lot of the scriptures from Zoroastrianism to Buddhism to the Quran to anything, So that was purely due to be able to have the experience of seeing what they are all about. But for me, purely my spirituality and my experience of life comes directly from the experience that I've been having with life. So, look at where we're sitting here. This by itself is much bigger and better than any form of religion, in my opinion. This is a miracle, when you find yourself sitting in an environment that is as beautiful as here. You can breathe the air, you can feel the wind on your skin. You can feel the sensations, you can feel love, you can feel different emotions, you know. This is, for me, this is what life is all about. And my lives inside of us, our mind, our body, and our soul.
Should we have one last question?
Nick, Sassan, you talk about energies, you talk about spiritualism beyond materialism. My question is about the creative process. When do you consider that one of your works, in particular the paintings, reach their own end? When you consider that you found a balance, at what stage? When do you think that the different works are transferring the energy you wanted to transfer on the canvas?
Yeah, well, very interesting question, and I think you're already fishing for information for the book. So, you know, when I started working on the canvas, I just go with it. You know, there's no planning behind it, and I start working on the canvas, and I can work on a particular canvas for 20, 30 hours in a go. I can work on it for an hour, you know, during the week. It's just that it's feeling, you know, when you look at the painting, and I mean, you've been working with so many artists yourself, you know, you see some of the works, you see like, oh my God, this work, you have that connection right away, you know, so it's something similar, you know. For me, I have a set of values inside of my mind that I would like to express via my creative practice. So once I have a canvas ready and standing in the atelier, and normally I let it be for a week or 10 days or 2 weeks or a month, and I come back to it, but if I still have the same feeling with it, I know that it's matured, it's ready to go. So in short, honestly, it's just a question of that 1 second feeling that I get, you know, that click. If I get it, I let it be. If I don't get it, then I know. I mean, a lot of my collectors, my wife, she's number one in this, in this, because she always sees a painting and she's like, I cannot believe that you destroyed the canvas. You know, you painted it, or you went, because I didn't have that feeling. So I let it be whenever I have that click. It's hard to explain. No, it just needs to be right for me. You know, otherwise I keep on going.
Thank you.
Well, I think that click is a good final ending. So, Sassan, thank you very much. Congratulations on the exhibition.
Thank you.
Help? Not at all, pleasure. Presumably, thank you to our incredible hosts. And thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.